Artists in the West have, I think, always been able to make art that's political. We live in a free society, and actually that's something we should be always pushing at the boundaries of. Culturally, is political art, with a capital P, capital A, does it resonate now in an era of mass media? Less so, because actually a lot of the time you feel that, with respect, an artist has a more limited scope, and it can feel hectoring or simplistic given the sophisticated network of international media and the general media and political literacy of a lot of people. Now, having said that, I'm aware that there's plenty of parts of our democracy, and certainly, say, the American democracy, where people seem to have absolutely no political literacy, but then a visual art isn't going to make much difference either. I'm sounding slightly depressed or depressing, but I think if art seeks only to make a political point, then there should be a questioning as to the medium that is being used. I think art, to be critically rigorous, in other words, that art that has an understanding and engagement with and offers a kind of knowing critique of the medium in which it's working and the culture in which it operates, I think then starts to be more interesting politically. So, I mean, I would argue that people like Mark Bradford, for example, have a strong political and social dimension. And actually, I could say, in the context of an exhibition that he's just made at White Cube, called Through Darkest America with Truck and Tank, that actually it's as much about the devastation of African American communities in certain cities where the highway network was made, but that's not preached about in the actual works. The works themselves are abstracted maps with this kind of layering of posters and billboards and colour and form, and they're such sophisticated, potent works of art in themselves, but they have this underlying political critique. But there is much a rumination on and an expansion on a critique of American abstract expressionism as they are, and French affichiste work of the 1950s, and Marx's singular vision as an artist, as they are a socio-political critique of contemporary America. But he's an African American who feels quite strongly that abstraction has been a fundamentally white terrain, and he wants to look at that. And I think in a democracy, the idea of making your own position count has resonance, and I think that showing art in restrictive societies, I mean, we in the West are desperately looking for the new markets of China, the Middle East, and so on. But it's pretty dubious in a sense, because we're a post-avant-garde world, but we still subscribe to the view that freedom of speech and that kind of visceral shock and so on are things that matter. I think the shock is overrated. I don't know many artists who actually actively set out to shock, but certainly we want to challenge boundaries and so on. And then what happens when you go to the Middle East or China, where things are very censored in art fairs and so on? Well, everyone plays the game, because otherwise the work won't be shown. And I think that's where one could be political. In other words, so it could be political to, a Tracy Emin abortion suite shown in the south of the United States would be a much more overtly political work than, say, it would be shown in London. But it would still have political overtones with a small p.
Absolutely. Okay.
I think art's as important as it ever was. I think in British culture, arts in some ways has moved to a more central position. I think that we as a culture were very literary dominated, and I think things are, I'm not trying to knock the literary world in order to make the visual culture rise, but I think we're much more confident and visually literate than we were even 3 decades ago. There's an old story I always tell that Kenneth Clark, when he was director of the National Gallery in the 50s, was asked about historic British art and said, "We don't really have any visual tradition in this country. We're a literary nation." Well, if the director of the National Gallery says that, what does that say about a nation's self-image? I mean, that's quite dismissive of Turner, Reynolds, Gainsborough, Constable, Hogarth, Stubbs, Blake, and so on. Although maybe Kay Clark would have liked Blake as a poet, but the Royal Academy didn't.